time to ask some basic fundamental questions about Islam. Questions that, frankly, others in Canada, in fact, in the USA and the West in general, are simply reluctant, even frightened to ask. Now, Robert Spencer is the founder of Jihad Watch, and he asked these questions, and he joins me now from New Hampshire. Welcome back to you, my friend.
Happy to be here, Michael. Thank you.
And I want to say this. We were chatting before the break, and I asked, we're going to be in Toronto in the near future, and you said, well, no one has invited me up. I think of all the third-rate people who are asked to speak up here for all sorts of large fees, and they've got nothing original to say. You're one of the most important voices out there. So anyone watching right now, contact this man, give him a huge amount of money, fly him to Toronto, and we can have him actually live in the studio. You've just finished your latest book, which is called Did Muhammad Exist?
Yes, that's right. Just sent it into the publisher, ISI, yesterday, and it'll be out in the spring.
Did he? Did he exist?
He probably did, but everything that we know about him is legend. He's kind of like Robin Hood, who probably existed, but he probably was not somebody who took from the rich and gave to the poor and lived in Sherwood Forest with Friar Tuck. That's all just made-up stories, and so it is with Muhammad. We know nothing about him for fully 60 years after he is supposed to have died. There's absolutely nothing in the records of either the Arab conquerors or the people they conquered about the conquests happened, but neither the conquerors nor the conquered ever mentioned Islam or Muhammad or Qur'an. None of those things existed up to that for 60 years after Muhammad's supposed time of death.
Now, if any bright spark out there is saying, oh, well, the same applies to Jesus. Actually, I'm just finishing a book now, last few weeks, called Heresy, Great Lies About Christianity. This idea that did Jesus exist? No serious scholar would ask that. There's overwhelming non-Christian pagan writing and evidence that Jesus existed. We know, you might not think he was the Messiah, I think you're wrong, but there's overwhelming evidence for that. But you're saying that there's a 60-year hiatus, and there's just no mention of a man who was apparently so important to the culture.
Yeah, you're quite right, Michael. The analogy is very good because there are all sorts of non-Christians who speak about Jesus and about the Christians in the early decades after the time of Jesus' life. But with Muhammad's life, in the decades after he's supposed to have lived, there's this huge silence. And it's really a very strange silence because the Arabs were certainly pouring out of Arabia and conquering the Middle East and North Africa, India, Persia, Spain. And in all that time, they don't say anything about Muhammad. The people who conquered them never call them Muslims. They call them Saracens or Hagarians or Mujahirun, but never Muslims. And they never have any idea, they show no hint that these people are coming with a book, a prophet, a new religion. Interesting.
Now, when I mentioned the comparison with Jesus, I think what is fascinating to construe from this is that we can say in any Christian-based country Jesus didn't exist. We can say the most repugnant, vile things, actually, and nothing's going to happen. Could you, in any country with a majority Islamic population, could you write a book saying, did Muhammad exist? Could you question whether he existed at all? Would you be allowed to?
Well, I'll tell you, there is a gentleman, Suleiman Bashir. He's dead now, but he was a courageous scholar in actually the West Bank and at the University of Nablus, and he actually posited to his students a few years back that the Quran was the product of historical development, which is something I discuss in my new book, and his students threw him out the window. They had no patience for this kind of thing, and his life was under threat for the scholarly investigations that he had undertaken.
He merely said that a sacred text to Muslims, the Quran, was a product of historical development, which is said about the Bible all the time. And they threw him out of the window, and now he's dead.
Yes, quite right, exactly. And Bart Ehrman, who's a New Testament scholar who says that none of it happened and so on, I have a video up at Jihad Watch just today. Somebody asks him, so when are you going to start your scholarly study of the Quran? And he says, when I no longer value my life. And really, you know, everybody takes for granted that if you start asking these kinds of historical questions, which are simply matters of history and matters of fact about Islam and the Quran and Muhammad, then you're taking your life into your hands.
You see, the first part of this equation, it is true. We know it to be true that there's a difference in cultures, a difference in the way religion is treated and life respected. But we can say that we look at mainstream TV, we look at the PBSs and the CBCs and the BBCs, they're telling us a completely different picture. They're saying all religions are the same, all peoples are the same, and pretty much all religion is bad, but we don't want to say much about Islam. Are they dishonest? Are they cowardly? Do they really believe this nonsense?
I think they to some degree really believe it. They will insist that all religions, as you say, all religions are sort of bad. But really, Islam is not as bad as the others. Islam is a religion of peace and tolerance that's been hijacked by extremists, but those extremists aren't really as bad as the Christian ones, and so on. And yet, if they really know, if you start talking to mainstream media reporters, I remember a few years back that I was talking to one about one of my other books, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam, and how it wasn't being carried in some bookstores in California. And he said, well, yeah, because they know that if they carry it, they'll get blown up. And I thought, well, if you know that, then you know Islam's not a religion of peace. You know that what I'm saying in the book is actually true. But the paradox was lost on him.
Susan Sarandon, I mean, I don't want to labor this point, but I think it is worth emphasizing to people watching. Susan Sarandon, I mean, she's an actress, who cares really, but she has just said to a captive audience that the Pope is a Nazi. The Pope, a man who was forced to join the Hitler Youth, he left the German military as quickly as possible, put his life on the line. His father was a police officer who resisted Nazism, but because he was German, he's a Nazi. Now, she says that, she's an idiot, she can say whatever she wants. But would this great liberal campaigner stand there and say, I don't know, Muhammad, if he existed, had sex with very young girls. He believed in slaughter. He believed in ethnic cleansing. Do you think she'd say that?
Well, no, she wouldn't, and yet the records are rather forthright, you know, Michael. You mentioned the sex with children, and Muhammad, according to the earliest Islamic sources, he had sex with a 9-year-old when he was 54, and she became his favorite wife. Now, that's pretty straightforward in the sources, and I'm questioning the historical value of the sources, but the sources still say what they say. And the reality is that child marriage is something that's taken for granted all around the Islamic world, and is given the sanction of the Prophet's example. But if you talk about it in the wrong context, then yes, once again, you're taking your life into your hands.
When we hear the criticism, well, these things do seem difficult to understand, but it was the ancient world, and if you look at the Old Testament, which is much earlier, of course, but if you look at the Old Testament, that there are similar examples of repugnant behavior. Does any of that really apply? Is it authentic criticism?
No, it's actually a false analogy. The Old Testament is full of violent behavior and immoral behavior, but it is never called upon to those who believe in the Old Testament to imitate that violent behavior. It's said, and this has been problematic for Jewish and Christian biblical scholars throughout history, that God told Joshua to clear out whole cities and so on. But never does it say, you go and imitate Joshua and clear out whole cities. Whereas the Qur'an is very clear that it is the responsibility of believers as a whole in the aggregate to make war against unbelievers and to subjugate them under the rule of Islamic law. And that is mainstream Islamic teaching among the sects, that it's the responsibility of the Muslim community to wage war against unbelievers and to subjugate them. There's nothing like that in Judaism or Christianity.
Okay, stay with us, but I want to get some more answers from you and really put my life on the line. Don't go away. Robert Spencer, founder of Jihad Watch, a wonderful author, and I do recommend all of his books. There are many out there. You probably go to websites, because if you try some of the bookstores, there are some that are too frightened and intimidated to actually stock them. In this great time and era and area of free speech, there are people who won't stock certain books. Robert, I want to ask you a question about what happened today. We had a guest on earlier from Jerusalem, the exchange of Shalit for the 500, the first half of 1,027 Palestinian prisoners. I'm not so interested in the geopolitics of the situation right now, but Shalit is this, or frankly, this skinny little guy who's a conscript, a corporal in a fairly lowly position in the Israeli army. Those who've been released, there are people amongst the 500 who have stabbed female teenagers to death while looking in their eyes, who've killed children, who've killed elderly people simply having dinner, bombed discotheques. Is there not a dynamic in the Islamic world that says, this is wrong, even if it is what they think it's a liberation struggle, to kill children, to kill the innocent? Is there not an outcry within Islam?
No, there really isn't. I mean, you can look around. I monitor the Arabic press and the press in Islamic countries that are non-Arab every day. And I simply do not see this. And I would invite people to send it to me if you see it, but I don't see it out there. The fact is that in Islam, it's a meritorious thing to kill an infidel who's considered to be a kafar harbi, an infidel at war with Islam. And pretty much every Israeli falls into that category. And so there's really no restriction on it, and there's no shame. As a matter of fact, the people who kill Israelis are generally celebrated as heroes. Their posters are up in Gaza and the West Bank on little kids' walls. They get their pictures are traded like bubblegum cards, and they are celebrated.
I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I've never seen, ever, in Israeli society, an Israeli warrior. I mean, there are people who are celebrated to a certain extent, but the culture is just anathema to them. If anything, it can be an irritatingly pacific culture, and almost an embarrassment that people have to go out and fight wars and be brave.
Yes, very much so. And they have tried so many times to make peace. I mean, I think that this Shalit deal is just another indication. I mean, it's preposterous. As you point out, murderers, people who have gloried in the deaths of Israeli civilians, and 1,000 prisoners being exchanged for one. When you know something, this has been done before, and 50% of the terrorists, jihad terrorists that the Palestinians have gotten freed in swaps for Israeli soldiers that they've been holding, have returned to terrorism. One of them, Abbas ibn Muhammad al-Sayyid, he was freed in '96, and in 2002, he participated in another jihad attack, killing 31 Israelis and wounding another 150. He's just one example of very many who've returned and committed mass murder of Israeli civilians after being freed from prison in a prisoner exchange. Well,
apparently the Israelis didn't even ask for the prisoners to not return to terror this time. They realized it was largely pointless. In terms of Islam, beyond the Middle East, though, we all know Muslims, in, if you like, the Islamic diaspora, whatever you want to call it, people who live outside of the heartlands of Islam, lovely, kind, generous people, people who have changed my life, who have been so welcoming. Is your argument that they are doing this in spite of their Islamic faith? They would think otherwise.
Well, see, it's a complex thing. It's not that they're doing it in spite of their Islamic faith, but they are doing it while not paying attention to the aspects of their Islamic faith that the jihad terrorists are using to justify violence and hatred and supremacism. There are many things that Islam teaches, and one of the things that it does teach is hospitality toward the stranger, kindness toward people, and so on. But there's a very sharp dichotomy between believers and unbelievers, and generally, believers are not supposed to show the same kindness to unbelievers as they are to believers. As the Qur'an says, Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. Those who follow him are merciful to one another, but harsh or ruthless to the unbelievers. And does that mean that all Muslims are harsh or ruthless to the unbelievers? Of course not, because some people will just be acting like human beings and they will be better than those teachings, but that doesn't mean that those teachings do not exist. There are people who are very serious about every aspect of Islam, people who are very serious about only parts of it, people who call themselves Muslims but don't really care about what it teaches. Just as in Judaism and Christianity, there's a spectrum of belief, knowledge, and fervor.
Just very quickly, what would you say and there'll be many Muslims watching now, again, decent, good people who love this country of Canada, and they'd feel very hurt by what you've said for the past 10, 15 minutes. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say, then prove me wrong, you know? I mean, the fact is, there are uncomfortable truths, but they're no less truths for being uncomfortable. And the fact is that jihad terrorists do point to the texts and teachings of the Qur'an and to the example of Muhammad to justify violence and terrorism. And they portray themselves around the Islamic world as the authentic exponents of Islam, and they call peaceful Muslims to join their groups or to support them on that basis, saying we're doing what really ought to be done. Now, that may not be so. They may not be the true Muslims, but then it's incumbent upon the lovely, peaceful Muslims to present a vision of Islam that differs from theirs and refutes theirs and can combat the influence that theirs has in the Islamic world, but they haven't done that yet.
Okay, Robert, we want to have you back on the show. Will you come back?
Always a pleasure, Michael. I'd love to be back anytime.
Great. Thanks for your time. And very important, you keep safe. Thank you very much.
You too. Thanks.